Morning everyone, my name's Andrew and I'm a gender equality convert. That's an admission I'd like to make first off the bat. I took over as the Exec Dean of School of Science from a restructured organisation almost 3 years ago. And having come from a school of computer science where it was predominantly men, the belief I held based out of ignorance, I hope rather than just sexism, although as an academic to admit you're basing something out of ignorance is a bit of a concern, was that, well, you know, we've got more women in teaching and nursing, we've got less women in computer science, that's just kind of how it is. But fortunately with the university coming on board in Australia with the Science and Gender Equity and taking on Athena Swan, being presented with the actual evidence and research and facts of the matter, it was pretty apparent pretty rapidly to me that that was not the case and it was not right, and there were a whole range of things that we could and should be doing to try and address this. So, myself as a convert, that was one place to start, but the challenge of course is that being us, the particularly white males in the room, being a big part of the problem, then also we need to get as many of those on board as possible to be part of the solution. And probably one of the easiest things for me, if it was contextualising it, having both a daughter and a wife, and as I say to some of my male colleagues, last time I checked, I mean, as a couple you decide you're going to have a child. I don't recall the last time there was a decision made as to which one of you was going to have the child. I'm pretty sure that's something you don't get much of a say in. At least as far as I'm aware, it's kind of always a woman who's going to have to bear that responsibility. So this decision or this notion that women choose to have the child in a relationship and therefore that's just, again, that's just part of how it is and we just need to accept that and move on, is also another nonsense notion that is pretty easy to hit people with that little fact to get them to think about it a little more in more depth. So yeah, so men are part of the problem, but also must be part of the solution. And we need to challenge a lot of those beliefs. Again, initially a lot of it is ignorance. And when you point out the fact that men can benefit from this substantially as well and equally as women can in terms of having gender equality. Particularly myself as, not so young now, but father of two children, 11 and 13, particularly a few years back, starting as head of school when the kids were much younger, I didn't want to take on any kind of leadership role at all because I didn't want to be that dad. I didn't want to be that guy who neglected, didn't spend time with the kids because of the pressures of this kind of role. So I took the role on, but I didn't. I just came and went as I pleased. And additionally, being able to do that, it's really important, as I'll get to later, to make sure your staff see you. Go, hey, I'm not coming in today, I'm going to watch the school athletics carnival. And also make it aware that, you know, that's perfectly okay for every staff member in the school to do the same and have that flexibility. But we are fighting against a historical legacy of bias and that male privilege is taken for granted. We're very fortunate in our university that we have a Vice-Chancellor who is very much on board with the equality agenda, and we have significant support from the top across the university for that. So again, the why. Why do we do this? So I think there's a few of these kind of examples that I went hunting for and found some really good ones that are just sort of not funny because they're true. But on the way here as well, flying in 20 odd hours, whatever it is, a ridiculous amount of time to get here, sitting in the lounge in Dubai with a colleague, and I turned to her and I said, have a look around where we're sitting in the lounge. And we looked around and there were probably out of the, 20, 30 people in this, I fly too much so I get access to these fancy places. There were probably 2 women in the entire room. The rest of the 20, 30 were all men. Now that's not a cause, that's a symptom, again, of the fact that men occupying these kind of roles in the place, and they are the ones we have to get on board, and we want to see more of a balance in terms of the people taking on those high roles. So how do we engage men in gender equality? And how engaged are men in gender equality, first off? A lot of us, I won't speak on behalf of the entire gender, but a lot of us don't know how to speak out necessarily. We know that we can see that there's probably something not right with such a massive gender imbalance, but some are also afraid to speak out as well, from both perspectives, not just because they fear of what their male colleagues might say, but also in some instances of what their female colleagues might say. We had a member of our Athena Swan Charter Committee went to a Women in Leadership conference a couple of years ago, and he was made to feel extremely unwelcome to the fact that someone actually said to him, why are you here, you're a man. This is not about you. Fortunately, that is in the minority of what we see, but that can be, and whilst that is an unusual example, and every instance of the numerous conferences and congresses of this type I've been to, I've always been made to feel most welcome. But there are some for whom that is a concern that they hold. And also some assume that others are more opposed to gender equality than they really are. So what that means is it's that group mentality. Well, everyone else probably thinks this isn't really a problem, so I'm just kind of going to go along with them and also just think that they're thinking, there's assume, we all know the word assume has 3 words in it. First one rhymes with some kind of donkey, you and me. So assumption is a pretty dangerous thing, particularly when it comes to gender equality. And also, of course, it's a women's problem, also known as just completely unengaged. Some of them as well in terms of the deniers, we'll get to that shortly. The reality is most men are in favour. As I said, the reality is for the vast majority, as far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of any that aren't, but pretty well every man is the product of having some kind of woman involved in their lives. You kind of don't get here without that. And either they have, they're pretty much all going to have a mother. They'll have a partner of some sort. A lot of times it's a woman, sometimes not so much. And have kids or not, some of whom may also women. But the reality is they're all going to have had a mother at some point in their lives. And with enough information and conversation, you can usually get them to understand to some extent to which it is a problem and how it is a problem for everybody and what we can do about changing it. Most of the time. We do, unfortunately, have some gender equality deniers and there's a similar mentality to climate change denial. It's really interesting, particularly academics who can be the most sane, rational people who can have an evidence-based discussion, and yet, when you put to them the evidence in terms of gender equality, they will just deny it. No, those are alternative facts. That's not actually a problem. It still astounds me that there's some people I work with. Fortunately, they report to me, so they have to do as they're told. So what makes a good male advocate? Generally, those with good leadership qualities who are good at engaging, good at influencing, and I mean that from every level. That's not someone in a high leadership position. My approach to leadership is that every role in an organisation from top to bottom has a leadership role to play. There are elements of leadership in every aspect of what you do in a role. And those who are better able to communicate that and influence others and pass on that information that, look, here's the problem, here's how it relates to us, particularly for males. And most males do want to be involved. Again, those with kids, pretty easy, those with families. Because you can give them the argument that, look, you can spend time with this, you don't need to be a slave to work, you can get out there and do this. And that is something that is an easy way to appeal to men to get them engaged. Again, as I said also, there's generally probably at least one woman in their lives who, they can probably think of and relate to. Again, another thing to them to think about the equality. Another really interesting example is we had at our uni executive meeting a couple of weeks ago was looking at the gender equality pay gap. And it was proposed to us that there's a very simple solution to fix the problem. Although that males and females fill in the exact same role in the university, we have no issue with that, but there is a pay gap in terms of those at senior levels or not. We could fix our gender pay equality gap by doing one of which is a fairly stupid response, which would be to sack a large number of women at the bottom level, which fortunately the person who proposed that was just trying to make a point. But the other one was we could just give every woman a 2% pay rise, even if they were at the same level as the men. And the reaction from the men in the room that a woman should get paid more for doing the same job was quite interesting, given that we know the reality is oftentimes that, hence the previous item in relation to the 75 cents of the dollar pay, that women are quite often doing the same job for less pay. It was quite interesting to see that reaction. So I did a bit of research, odd for an academic, into some of the barriers, again, why are more men not engaging in this necessarily. Interesting paper I came across here about some quite extensive research in terms of psychological standing. A lot of men not getting engaged in it because they lack psychological standing, as in, this is not a woman's problem, but I don't feel adequately equipped, to use a probably inappropriate expression, to actually engage in this argument because I haven't experienced that myself. So I'm not necessarily able to actively and fully participate in this conversation because I'm coming from a period of lesser psychological standing because I'm not a woman. And that is apparently the result of quite some extensive research. It's an interesting paper to have a read through. And so yet again, another thing to be aware of and to, again, to have to explain. And again, that's where women can play a really good role in encouraging men. As I said, rather than what the hell are you doing at this Women Leadership Conference, is thanks for coming along and, make them and welcome and participate. I was going to cheat. I also came across a paper that the Diversity Council of Australia released last year. Interestingly, this is a result of their synopsis. If you want access to the full paper as to how to fix a problem, you can only get access to that if you're a member, and you're actually not allowed to communicate it. So what I've presented here is a synopsis that I am allowed to communicate, as opposed to the really more useful stuff that we're not allowed to tell anyone about, which seems strange. I was going to cheat and just stick 10 of these up on the screen and go and have a seat for 20 minutes, but I thought that would be a bit lazy to come all this way and do that. So really this is just a bit of a cheat sheet, some things to consider in terms of these 10 guiding principles. So get the foundation right. Quality initiatives involve men, women as active equal partners. To the extent that we can actually achieve equity, because we know that it's not equal to start off with. So a grain of salt with that one. And the other thing as well is it is a business issue. The reality is the evidence says that we all know this, the workplaces who have a gender balance have better outcomes from a performance business perspective than those that don't. And whilst those of us in the room know that, it's not going to be the case that certainly men don't know that. So presenting it as a business outcome, if nothing else, is look, if having this imbalance is holding us back. We know that if we have, and there was a presentation from the lady from Japan yesterday around the patents coming out of Japan where their team was a mixed gender team as opposed to simply males. And the reality is across most of those disciplines where there was a mixed gender team, they had more patents, better outcomes in those areas than those that didn't, as well as a whole range of other evidence. So getting the framing right and saying, don't worry about that for those as appropriate, that this is a business issue. Make visible, target all key gender equality areas. So power decision making, security, personal safety, everything. Talk about the whole lot of it, as well as, after I've just said, talk about it as a business issue. Yeah, getting the messaging right, and as I said, given the issues around psychological standing, getting the messaging right is really crucial to appeal to men as well as women. It's not much point having a gender equality message and then having your equality message being unequal in terms of who it's appealing to. Engage a diversity of men, so different organisational roles and at all levels. That's really important. It can't just be the boss, because that's just not going to work. So it has to come from the top and the bottom and at all points in between. And I think we've done that fairly well at Edith Cowan University, where I'm from, in terms of having that engagement. Not only in terms of the Charter Committee, but across the university, holding workshops and inviting all to attend to raise any and every concern or issue or challenge or solution or anything else I'd like to see, and then communicating that back to everybody as well. Education about how to lead change effectively, because the reality is this will involve change. If it doesn't involve change, then why are we bothering if we're not going to change anything we're doing? And we won't get that change if we just simply sit around and talk about it. So walking the talk is important as well as just simply talking it. Making connection between work and home. As I've already said, that is really crucial to engage a certain percentage of men. Obviously, the stereotypical single white, older white male probably working in information technology who probably doesn't necessarily have a family as such can be, and I'm speaking from experience because there's someone that I know who have this attitude. Trying to get those types around. I said that those are the deniers, and sometimes there's a point at which you sort of need to cut your losses, but it doesn't mean we don't try that. And in most instances, making that familial connection or personal connection will be effective. Also making that connection between work and communities as well as work and family. So by framing gender inequality as a societal problem, it's not just of this organisation. Improving this doesn't just make it better for our organisation, doesn't make it just better for our community, it makes it better for society in general. Build individuals' gender confidence and capability. So again, through running workshops, communication, talking about things from an evidence basis, bringing all this out into the light and talking to them about it, to challenge their mindsets, assumptions, and behaviours. As I said, the hardcore deniers, we might win them round eventually. Fortunately, they're in the vast minority. But that communication aspect is certainly vital. Also encouraging men and women to challenge and change gender-biased organisational policies and practices. That's where for us I think the Athena Swan process has been really helpful to us to go through and dig through all those data sets and look at what we're doing and how we're doing it. We thought we were okay, and then you dig in, you look at some of it and you find out some of the things you've got embedded in process and policy that just had to be changed because that was causing us some issues. So work with those in leadership roles to identify potential advocates. Can depend on the person, but corporate values are really important. You generally find that those, so our corporate values are, and you can tell I'm part of a leadership group because I know them off by heart, in the right order. Integrity, respect, rational inquiry, personal excellence. And particularly from the perspective of integrity, rational inquiry, the people that really embody those values are going to be some of the biggest advocates for this. Because it's pretty easy to respect someone who holds integrity, respect and fairness in high regard as being someone who's likely to be an easy convert to take on a role to promote fairness. Key life indicator, I just made that up. I don't know what that is. It seemed like a good thing at the time for them, and link it to their career progression. So the things that are about, we talk about work-life balance, so I just invented this career key life indicator thing. How much time you spend doing the things with different, yeah, I thought so. Yeah. This is not a bad thing. We should make this up, make it a thing. KPIs seem so dry and stale and old. So things that they do, how much time they do spend doing the things outside with family and friends, and encouraging that kind of behaviour that we know can help contribute to gender equality. Also, get them out, push them out of their comfort zone a little bit. Yeah, okay, so the psychological standing in terms of, well, I'm not a woman, therefore, pushing them out of that can be good for their own personal growth in terms of getting them to take on something that might seem a bit challenging for them. Positive experience for being a change agent, so workshops. I led a couple of the workshops we ran around Athena Swan early on to look at some of the gender equality issues and challenges we had. And it is important to get, not me, people, hopefully not too much like me because that wouldn't be great, but people who are passionate and promoting of gender equality to get out there and tell, particularly males, to say, well, this is why it's important to me and how it's important to me and important to all of us. Because when you hear that from when the other males hear that from a male in a public forum, okay, it's probably safe that no one's shot him yet, so it's probably fine for me to also get on board with this and take it on. And ensure that you engage with all males of all levels of the organisation. Again, I'm repeating that, but that's kind of important. Mentors and role models, both male and female, really important. Promoting the benefits of equality to all through workshops where attendees, as I said, get to hear from the likes of me as well as the women leaders. Networking and attendance at events such as these, and it is great to see a pretty significant proportion of males in the room, relatively speaking. Make it relatable. As I said, all men have had at least one woman involved in their lives at some point. And women need to encourage and support particular events such as this. That's also really vital in terms of that, getting the men to engage. So at ECU, gender equality is not a woman's issue. There is an ongoing perception about that. We're working hard to address that. Male champions for gender equality are just as much a part of the solution as women. We participate in the panel pledge, so we don't participate in panels where there is a gender imbalance. So when our VC, our Vice Chancellor, gets invited to an event, he has already declined some of them where there was only one woman on a panel and said, well, good. Gender balance, or we're not, yeah, exactly, or we're not attending. In Australia, we hold Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGEA, citation, we're one of a relatively few number of universities in Australia that hold that, which holds us to account on gender reporting. So that's also a good way as well to tie that to an outcome. So men are part of the problem, have to be part of the solution. Engagement, communication, leadership values. Try up to a certain point. Remember, you can get most people on board and engage in understanding why this is an issue. You're not always going to get everybody. Make it a part of your organisational strategy and set targets. It has to be in your organisational plan. It has to be in strategic goals and outcomes. It's great having a committee and it's great having workshops and getting all this done, but unless it's actually a core part of the values and outcomes and goals for your organisation, it won't change. And whether that includes quotas and targets as appropriate, then that's what you do. That's what you include and make it part of the outcome for the university. We're in fact talking at the moment about having KPIs for myself and my fellow executive deans, of which I'm in the minority, which is important. So we have 8 executive deans, 5 women, 3 men, which is good. I'm happy to be in the minority in that case. And we're looking about setting a KPI for these kind of values to promote equality. If we don't achieve them, then there will be outcomes for us, which are not good ones. Also, it's got to be resourced. You can't just simply expect this all to happen organically, because it won't. Fortunately, we devote considerable resource to this, including running activities such as the previous speaker was talking about in terms of putting forward actual money for those returning from carers and parent leave, etc., to allow them to get back into research. And I think I've probably just about done pretty well.
You've got a few more minutes.
No, I've had enough of talking at people.
Yeah?